Most people believe that WikiLeaks to be a paragon of virtue and true blue grassroots journalism. What you have not been told, WikiLeaks is a conspiracy reaching deep into the inner sanctum of the National Security Agency and also the Central Intelligence Agency. One of the obvious questions about Assange is who paid him? And while we are celebrating his release and freedom, many questions remain. What was WikiLeaks? How did it come about? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the new launch of our English language channel, Daniel Estulin. Today I want to talk about Julian Assange. I think it's safe to say that his liberation last week, after more than 12 years in captivity, has been interpreted by collective humanity as victory of good against evil, freedom of expression against the jackboot of totalitarianism, us against them. And his suffering has been inhumane. Few people have had to endure what Julian Assange has had to deal with over this time. Torture to the nth degree for the entire world to see. And it was done so to make sure that if someone, anyone, anywhere had thought of defying this vile evil of the global elite, they would think twice before undertaking this insurmountable task. Freedom comes at a price, and Julian Assange paid for it. Oh, he paid for it. But for me, the key question of who and what is a Julian Assange take me back to the early beginnings of the WikiLeaks project. And while we are celebrating his release and freedom, many questions remain. What was WikiLeaks? How did it come about? Who did Julian Assange really work for? And what was WikiLeaks' final objectives? And these are some of the questions I would like to answer in our program today. Most people believe that WikiLeaks to be a paragon of virtue and true blue grassroots journalism. What you have not been told, WikiLeaks is a conspiracy reaching deep into the inner sanctum of the National Security Agency and also the Central Intelligence Agency. WikiLeaks is an unofficially sanctioned covert operation that takes into the netherworld of intrigue and compartmentalization, secret operations and contrived situations. Well, that can be for or against something or someone, depending on whichever guise is called up by the taskmaster, giving the high sign through the shadows of plausible deniability. A wilderness of chicanery, deceit, double or triple crosses, spin control, perception management, reality engineering, Operation Mockingbird, whatever you wish to call it. The strategic psychological operations designed to manipulate our media and our own perception of reality, and also to cover up this mega misdeeds of flagrant corruption. There's a word in English language for it, agnotology. And agnotology is the scientific study of culturally induced ignorance, such as when, for example, intelligence agencies or other shadow players use their behind-the-scenes capabilities of media spin to conceal scurrilous activities and agendas. And the cost of this mercenary connivance is our heritage. It's our liberty, it's our freedom, our country, and ultimately our future. And so this fascinating conspiracy puzzle takes us from the wandering theater company in Australia to macabre mind control experiments to cults, secret societies, Nazi rituals, billionaires, think tanks, and also foundations with far-reaching agendas. And needless to say, it implicates the White House, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, etc., etc. And in the middle of all of this is a mysteriously strange, this robotic character named Julian Assange. And I think it's safe to say that some of you will not be happy about some of the conclusions we'll make today. Let's talk about the role of the corporate media. So WikiLeaks was started back in December 2006, and oddly enough, as a supposed leak site, a dissident site. It was given a great deal of immediate mainstream attention from the likes of Washington Post and New York Times and Time Magazine, The Guardian of London. The mainstream media was telling us how to interpret WikiLeaks in such a way that it sounded strangely familiar to what George W. Bush was saying post 9/11. And so by March 2007, more than 1 million would-be documents would be leaked from government and corporations all over the world, in Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, former Soviet bloc in what the mainstream media called a bold new collective experiment in whistleblowing. That is, of course, as long as you don't accept any of the conspiracy theories that WikiLeaks could be a front for the CIA or some other intelligence agency. And so this initial collaboration between WikiLeaks and selected mainstream media, it's not fortuitous. It was a part of an agreement between major US and also European media, the New York Times, Bilderberg, CFR, The Guardian, the left wing of the British intelligence agencies, Der Spiegel from Germany, Bilderberg, The Economist, member of the Bilderberg Group. On the one hand, and WikiLeaks' editor Julian Assange. And so these large corporations were directly involved in the editing, in the selection of these leaked documents. In other words, the press and Assange were partners. In fact, Julian Assange was granted back in 2008 The Economist's New Media Award. Why is that important? Well, because The Economist has a very close relationship to Britain's financial elite. The Economist started publishing in the heyday of the British East India Company back in 1843, that it intervened regularly in American politics, including against Abraham Lincoln's efforts to save the Union. And today it represents everything which is the antithesis of the American Revolution. It's an establishment news outlet which has, on balance, supported Britain's involvement, for example, in the Iraq War. And The Economist, at the time editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, he was a participant in 8 of Bilderberg conferences. And The Economist is jointly owned by Britain's Rothschild family and Lazard Frères banking house. And both of these are very close to Britain's royal family. So, for example, Sir Evelyn Robert Adrian de Rothschild was chairman of The Economist from 1972 to 1989. His wife, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. For many, many years, she sat on The Economist board, and the Rothschild family also has a sizable shareholder interest in The Economist. And then there's the Lazard, a leading French and British asset of the Anglo-Dutch combine centered in the Royal Dutch Shell, which is the Dutch and the British royal families, and in the Rothschild banking organization. And this is the phenomenon today called the Bilderberg Group. For example, Hippolyte Worms, the founder of Bank Worms. And so I have a question. Why would Julian Assange receive the support from Britain's foremost establishment news outfit that has consistently, over many decades, been involved in media disinformation and with clearly defined links to the Anglo-Dutch royalty, the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, the Rothschild banking families? Are we not dealing with a case of manufactured dissent, whereby the process of supporting and rewarding WikiLeaks for its endeavor becomes a means of controlling and manipulating the WikiLeaks project, while at the same time embedding it into the mainstream media? I think it's also worth mentioning another important link. Assange's lawyer at the time, Mark Stevens of Finer Stevens Innocent, FSI, which is a major London elite law firm, happens to be the legal advisors to the Rothschild Trust. And while this in itself does not prove anything, it should nonetheless be examined in the broader context of WikiLeaks' social, also corporate entourage. We're talking about the New York Times, we're talking about Council on Foreign Relations, the brother or the sister to the Bilderberg Group, The Economist, the Time magazine, Forbes. So the question is WikiLeaks part of an awakening of public opinion, of a battle against the lies and fabrications which appear daily in the print media and also network TV, or the flip side of it? Is it a part of a process of infiltrating alternative media, critical of the government's way of handling, for example, the US foreign policy, and not only? And so how can this battle against media disinformation be waged with the participation and collaboration of the corporate architects of media disinformation? You see, starting in the early days of the Cold War, we're talking about the late 1940s, post-World War II, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, began a secret project called Operation Mockingbird. It was an initiative of the CIA Office of Special Projects, and in October 1977, we know this,
Unlock hundreds of hours of exclusive content on today's critical economic, geopolitical, and social issues. Enjoy world-class interviews, deep analysis, exclusive workshops, and webinars. Stay informed and educated on topics that matter now more than ever with Daniel Estulin's unparalleled insights.
Because in October 1977, an article published by the Rolling Stones magazine, Bernstein, of the Watergate fame, reported that more than 400 American journalists worked for the CIA. Think of that number. And so sources told Bernstein at the time that the New York Times, America's most respected newspaper at the time, was one of the CIA's closest media collaborators, and needless to say, the Washington Post. And so today's corporate media is an instrument of war propaganda. I think we all know this. And which begs the question, why would the New York Times all of a sudden promote transparency and truth in the media by assisting WikiLeaks in spreading the word, and that people around the world would not pause for one moment and question the basis of this incongruous relationship? WikiLeaks has the essential features of a process of manufacturing dissent. In other words, it sought to expose government lies. It had released important information on US war crimes. But once the project becomes embedded in the mount of mainstream journalism, it was used as what? As an instrument of media disinformation. It is in the interest of the corporate elite to accept dissent and also protest as a kind of a feature of the system, in as much as they do not threaten the established social order. You can protest because it gives the idea of plurality, as long as you keep it within limits and you don't threaten the order. Because the purpose is not to repress dissent, but on the contrary, to shape it, to mold it, this project movement, the protest movement, and to set the outer limits of dissent. It makes it easy. And what this examination of the WikiLeaks project also suggests is that the mechanics of the New World Order propaganda, particularly with regard to its military agenda, has become increasingly sophisticated. So the New World Order politicians are, in a sense, I'd say, disposable. They can be replaced. What must be protected and must be sustained at all costs are the interests of the economic elite, the money which control the political apparatus from behind the scenes the world over. And as I said many times before, the global elite is not afraid of Bill Clinton, of Hillary Clinton, of Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or Putin. They're afraid of us, the people. Because if one day, God, hopefully God help us, we wake up as collective humanity, we can put up a formidable front against the global elite. And so in the case of WikiLeaks, the facts are, again, contained in a data bank, and many of these facts, particularly those pertaining to foreign governments, they serve US foreign policy interests. You control the dialectic, you control both sides of the equation. So remember this, all the wiki facts were selectively redacted, then analyzed, then interpreted by the mainstream media, which serves the global elite. And while the numerous pieces of information contained in the WikiLeaks data banks are accessible, I think it's easy to understand that the broader public will not normally or ever take the trouble to actually go through tens of thousands, if not millions of pages of WikiLeaks data bank. And so the public prefers, they will read the redacted selection and also interpretation given to us by the mainstream media. And they're telling you, the mainstream media, look, don't worry about it. We have done the work. We have done the legwork. We have analyzed all the information, and we've picked out the most important tidbits for you so that you, the people, don't waste your valuable time going all through perennial information. And so you get these limited forms of critical debate and transparency, again, are tolerated while also enforcing broad public acceptance of the basic premise of US foreign policy, including its global war on terror. So let's analyze this. The big lie of the 21st century is terrorism itself. Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, ISIS. And one can judge the validity of information by what is hidden rather than what is revealed. So my question is, does WikiLeaks say anything about Osama bin Laden? Now, according to the papers that Julian Assange has released, bin Laden at the time was allegedly in Quetta in Pakistan, taking part in Quetta Shura, which is the council of the alleged terrorist chiefs. So the subliminal message from the government is, we have to go into Pakistan and kill him. And according to WikiLeaks, up until his alleged death at the hands of United States SEALs, Osama bin Laden was very much alive, conveniently maintaining the myth for the American administration and its war on terror at a point when most Americans, again, we're talking about 9/11 was in 2001, 2002, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Most Americans had forgotten the original reason the Bush administration allegedly invaded Afghanistan. And so the reader should recall that the supposed reason for the invasion was to go after bin Laden as the mastermind of 9/11. So let's turn our attention to Julian Assange. One of the obvious questions about Assange is, who paid him during his heyday? If we follow the money, and that's what you need to do when you investigate things, you follow the money, we fairly quickly come to a dead end. So who paid for his lifestyle? For example, on the one hand, we're told he's a nomad, a sort of elite hobo, someone who jet sets around the world with this duffel bag full of socks, living out of his backpack, sleeping on the office floor, showing up in different parts of the world. This is surely not a typical profile of a happy-go-lucky young man. It is rather a profile of a spy. And back in 2010, Julian Assange hung out on the multi-million-dollar estate of an establishment blue blood with connections to George Soros. For example, Assange spent a lovely Christmas holiday in Ellington Hall, the estate of Von Smith, the man who owns and operates the Frontline Club. He's an international globalist, he's a Bilderberg member, speculator extraordinaire. And when you consider that every single WikiLeaks release at the time did nothing except build support for globalist agendas, well, this connection seems beyond obvious in its implications. And even back when WikiLeaks was the front cover of every media outlet in the entire world, I had a lot of questions regarding Assange's credibility. And for example, while demanding transparency from governments and corporations around the world, Assange was very secretive when it came to revealing his personal biography, his former business associates prior to launching the WikiLeaks project. If you read his bio at the time, it stated that he is a prolific programmer and consultant for many open-sourced projects, and his software is used by most large organizations as inside every Apple computer. And so I emailed Assange at the time and asked him to comment on the following questions. Was he working freelance? Who did he work for? Does Apple know? Apple certainly denied it. It's like his PhD from a phantom online university. So why advertise it? Or is it simply his narcissistic fixation dominating his personality? And neither WikiLeaks nor Assange ever replied, for obvious reasons. What we do know is that his parents ran a traveling theater company in Australia. Assange lived for a time on this magnetic island off the coast of Australia. He was homeschooled, and when he was 8 years old, his mom hooked up with a musician. And then things got really weird. The musician became abusive, she says, and they separated. A fight ensued over the custody of Assange's half-brother, and Claire, the mother, she felt threatened, fearing that the musician would take away her son. And so Assange recalled saying that now we need to disappear. And so he lived on the run with her mother from the age of 11 to the age of 16. Now, what is known, the man, the musician, belonged to a powerful cult called the Family. And its motto was unseen, unknown, unheard. Some members of the Family were doctors who persuaded mothers to give up their newborn children to the cult's leader, Anne Hamilton Byrne. The cult had moles in the government, according to Assange himself, who provided the musician with leads on his mother's whereabouts, which is why they had to be on the run from the time he was 11 to the time he was 16. And so Anne Hamilton Byrne cult was a group of people around Melbourne, Australia, who were using LSD as a kind of a treatment for children because they called it therapy. And the therapy consisted of giving a child LSD and locking them up in a dark room. Now, for those who don't know, this is a classic cover for intelligence agencies' mind control program. And some people, in fact, point to this alleged infamous CIA-run operation called Project Monarch, which was imported from Nazi Germany under its old name, Marionette Programming. And Project Monarch is a US Defense Department code name assigned to a subsection of the CIA's double top secret projects. It is a genealogical approach to define transgenerational, in other words, via genetic psychology, behavior modification through trauma-based psychological mind control, especially in children. And so the basic component of the Monarch program is this sophisticated manipulation of the mind. How? Using extreme trauma to induce multiple personality disorder. And the original documentation on the project came from the Nazi top secret black arts. That's what it was called. Research, which the United States government acquired at the end of World War II, and subsequently they renamed US Department of Defense Project 63. And so there's virtually no publicly available information on the Anne Hamilton Byrne cult. And whatever exists has been classified top secret by the Australian government. So it makes one wonder, why? And so from what we know, it looks to be, again, a classic CIA operation. The patients, most of them children, using a deniable cutout, Anne Hamilton Byrne, were part of this ghastly experiment. Like other CIA guinea pigs under the MK Ultra program, they were unwitting and expendable test subjects. And so I have a question I wanted to ask Julian Assange. Was Assange part of one of these experiments?
Unlock hundreds of hours of exclusive content on today's critical economic, geopolitical, and social issues. Enjoy world-class interviews, deep analysis, exclusive workshops, and webinars. Stay informed and educated on topics that matter now more than ever with Daniel Estulin's unparalleled insights.
Because these operations had a fringe benefits, and the tests were taking part outside the United States and on non-US citizens, there was another layer of deniability and responsibility for the outcome of this experiments was further removed. And what Assange seems to have gotten out of his childhood experience is a tremendous anti-authoritarian hatred for governments and corporations. How did this deep-rooted mistrust of authority reflect on Assange's personal development? That's another thing I wanted to ask him. And then, as far as we are concerned, how can it help us penetrate the depth of the inner self? What clues does it leave behind to the real Julian Assange? There are many questions. We don't have the answers. It's open-ended. So is WikiLeaks a CIA project or a CIA front? Now, according to Julian Assange, WikiLeaks is not a front for the CIA, for the MI6, for FSB, or any other agency around the world. Quite the opposite, he said. He said, by definition, spy agencies want to hide information. We, meaning WikiLeaks, we want to get it out to the public. That's quite true. But by definition, a covert operation always pretends to be something it is not and never claims to be what it is. In other words, it can be identified as an official CIA project, so it must seem to be the opposite of that. Because remember, for any false flag operation to be effective, 90% of what you put out has to be legitimate information. Because only then will you be able to target the people with disinformation for completely different reasons. So how is this linked to the real world and also to Julian Assange? Well, you see, back in 2010, the United States government argued that the government should stealthily infiltrate groups that post alternative theories on historical events via what they call chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups, and also attempt to undermine these groups. And the logic is straightforward. People who believe in conspiracy theories have a limited number of sources of information that they trust. And therefore, it would not work to simply refute the conspiracy theories in public, the very source that conspiracy theorists believe would have to be infiltrated. In other words, the United States government says, let's pose as patriots online. Let's disrupt the 9/11 truth movement. Let's put out our own disinformation. And the purpose not to suppress dissent, but on the contrary, to shape, remember we talked about this earlier, and to mold the protest movement, to set the outer limits of dissent. So what does Assange do? He openly attacks the same people his alternative, independent, anti-authoritarian movement should be defending. And this is a classic tactic of intelligence operations: infiltrate, divide, and conquer. Regulate, limit, and control. And the old adage that the reason for war is to end war cannot be considered wise, especially when war has become the means to incite armed conflicts that far surpass the original reason for the violent struggle itself. And so when the Belfast Telegraph interviewed Assange back in 2010, he stated, "I'm constantly annoyed that people are distracted by false conspiracies such as 9/11, when all around us we provide evidence of real conspiracies for war or mass financial fraud." Now think about that. If you're coming out with revelations that the government does not want you to know, such as what really happened in 9/11, you don't get the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Guardian or Time Magazine or the Economist or Der Spiegel cooperating with you. They are the enemy. Let's talk about another aspect: war on drugs. In the spring of 2010, WikiLeaks published hundreds of thousands of pages of allegedly sensitive material from American sources within the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the evidence suggests, however, that far from the honest leak, it is a calculated disinformation to gain of the US and perhaps Israel and Indian intelligence, and also a cover-up of the United States and Western role in drug trafficking out of Afghanistan. So I have a question: what does drug trafficking, Afghanistan, and WikiLeaks have in common? Is there anything in the WikiLeaks documents, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages, is there anything in the WikiLeaks documents on the US military role in the booming Afghan drug trade? Not a word. Almost 1 million pages, 1 million pages of WikiLeaks documents, and not one single word on a nefarious drug trade. Let's touch on something else: the future of whistleblowing. There's little doubt that WikiLeaks changed the world. However, these changes must be, I'd say, conceptualized within our understanding of the geopolitical reality we find ourselves in today. And so the reports from WikiLeaks are revelations only to those who largely adhere to the illusions of the world that we live in democracies, promoting freedom around the world and at home. Well, we've seen how that works. You see, alone leaks, they're treacherous. Anonymous sources revealed by those not authorized to speak about the matter on the record, unnamed officials. Secret and confidential information is never reliable because it leads to closed and also self-deluded intelligence, in other words, intellectual and spy product. Questions remain, serious questions that beg for answers. What was that the original long-range agenda of the planners and schemers behind the WikiLeaks project? And yes, we need another source of information. We need a context. Meanwhile, the original purpose of WikiLeaks is dead in the water. And you have these thousands of mere carcasses float on the internet sea, none offering new material except the dribbles from the cables which are being erased as a result of the US Department of Justice and Julian Assange deal. Talk to you again next week. I'm Daniel Estulin. See you later. Goodbye.